welcome back to our study of the Hebrew alphabet, or the Aleph-Bet. Here we're going to clean up some of the messy messes we left behind during our last lesson when we talked about those letters with the dots in them, or the dagesh, and we also talked about the final form letters, and there's a couple other things about the alphabet that we will jump into, and then we'll move on next to vowels. But this is our first stop in Hebrew. Remember to take a breath, to remember why you're doing, what your goals are, and also remember that it's hard to learn a new alphabet. It's hard to learn a new language, let alone a new alphabet. But perseverance is the key. Write it out, keep repeating it. As Deuteronomy says, write it on your doorpost and on your arms, and recite it when you lie down and when you stand up and when you take a walk. That's Deuteronomy, of course, is saying that about the law, but I'm encouraging you to do that with just the Hebrew alphabet at first. So let's start with the way that we have started the last few times, to say, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim v'et haaretz. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim v'et haaretz. I hope you get to a place at some point where you can belt that out, but try to keep that pinging around in your head. We're actually going to study that in just a couple of weeks. So one thing to say about Hebrew as well is that you can make little songs of the alphabet, or the Aleph-Bet, and one of those songs would be this: Aleph-Bet Gimel Dalet Hey Vav Zayin Chet Tet Yod Kaf Lamed Mem Nun Samek Ayin Pei Tzadek Kof Resh Sin Shin Tav, and that's all. That's just what I put at the end. Now I know my Aleph-Bet. Next time, won't you say that's great? Or something like that. In any event, you can make up your own songs. I know there's a popular Yankee Doodle song for learning Hebrew, ABCs. You can look up the Hebrew alphabet song on YouTube and find a million versions, because lots of people learn these to be able to read Hebrew at their bat mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs, their coming of age ceremonies. So in any event, it's a little something for you to learn. So again, these important details that we left out of the last video, they're the dot letters. We started with Beit, and then Gimel, Dalet, Kaf, Pei, and Tav were all dot letters, or in Hebrew, dagesh letters. Now this dagesh does a couple different things, this little dot. But there's a really important thing that we'll start with, which is that it influences these letters in particular. Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Kaf, Pei, and Tav. We call these the Begad Kapat letters, or the Begad Kapat letters. Why do we call it that, Begad Kapat? Because look at those letters. See the English transliterations, B, G, D, K, P, T, if I'm reading from left to right? Huh? Do you see B, G, D, K, P, T? I'm just going to put some random vowels in between those letters, and I get Begad Kapat. Begad Kapat, all of the consonant sounds say these letters. Begad Kapata, Beit Gimel Dalet, Kaf Pei Tav. Those are special letters in Hebrew that can make two different sounds. The sound that I taught you last time was the sound with the dot in it, the dagesh in it, the strong sound. Begad Kapat letters can also be written without that dot or dagesh. If they are written without the dot or dagesh, they make slightly different sounds. Now these letters are transliterated if they do not have the dagesh in them, or the dot in them. They are transliterated slightly differently. Notice they have lines either below or above. Oh, the pei there is slightly out of place. The line should go directly over the pei. Sorry, the pei is one space off. But in any event, the lines go above or below the pei. The transliteration, by the way, you can find in Appendix 5 of your textbook. It for some reason, it's not with everything else in the textbook, but Appendix 5 can be found on page 445 of your Kutz-Josberger textbook, and you can see the transliteration symbols there. On page 446 and 447 is the vowels. So you'll see that the Bagad Kafat letters are represented in the transliteration list with the two different values. If it doesn't have a bait, a dagesh, the bait has a B with a line underneath it. If it does have the dagesh, then it is transliterated with just a plain B. So these Bagad Kapat letters, if they have the dagesh in them, then they sound like kind of normal to us English speakers, right? People who have some familiarity with the English language, this will seem typical. If they don't have the dagesh in them, they will have a slightly different sound. The sound that they have if they don't have the dagesh in them is a soft sound that we call a spirant. You let air through. If they have the dagesh, you make a hard stop. So the buh. If you make the sound of with your mouth, you'll see that you close off all of the air actually entirely. And then you let it all out in a big explosion. Buh. For a soft spirant version of that, you would let some air through the whole time. So instead of ba, you would say va. It's kind of like a V sound, but it's not va. It's like a B, but you let some air through. You can make a G this way too. So guh is a hard stop. Notice that you stop all the air in your mouth when you say guh. Try that. Try saying guh right now. Guh. But then if you let air through the whole time, you'd say gah. That would be the spirant form. That'd be a gimel without the dagesh. A dalet would be the same. A duh versus a the. Or for a kaf, a ka versus a kha. Or for a pei, a pa versus a fa. Or a ta for tav versus a tha. Now, some of these letters will actually make some distinctions in when we pronounce them, some of them we don't. For me personally, I take my cues from kind of modern Israeli speakers in this regard, where some of them make some pretty big pronunciation differences, like bait. I will actually pronounce bait differently. If there's a dagesh in it, I'll say ba. If there's not a dagesh in it, I'll say va. You can just say va. I mean, you don't have to make clear, you have to make a bait and a vav sound very different. It helps if you can. But the ka in kaf, I will actually say a ka, kind of like a chet, if there's no dagesh there. And for pa, for pei, I'll say pa if there's a dagesh, and if there's no dagesh, I will say fa. I'll actually kind of like phone, make an F sound in English. For gimel, dalet, and tav, no one in modern speech, and I don't. Some biblical scholars will make distinctions, but most don't. Some will say a tha for a tav, and so on. But for the most part, just don't make a distinction with gimel, dalet, and tav. Make your pronunciation distinctions with beit, kaf, and pei. The way I do this, or I learned this, is I actually made like a list, like a alphabet list that I would sing to myself. And every time I said a beit, a kaf, or a pei, I would actually sing the other value too. Ba, ba, ka, cha, pa, fa. So, in any event, that might help you. But those are important things to distinguish. The reason that these Bagad Kafat letters are important to us, we will actually I'm going to go back to the slide here. These Bagad Kafat letters are important to us because there will actually be another distinction we'll make with dageshes later, and these things will come back and be important. But just for the pronunciation alone, those can be really important for us to note. Okay, so on to the next thing, which is final form letters. Now, I told you final form letters. I said, don't worry about that now. Well, now is when we're going to worry about these final forms. There are 5 letters that only if they occur at the end of a word, they'll kind of uncurl a bit, or in the case of maim, get squared up. If you think about it, if you end a word, sometimes if you're writing in English in cursive, you might end the word a little differently. If you write the last letter at the end, than if you were to write it in the middle of a letter. That's kind of how a middle of a word. That's kind of how this is to me. I think of these letters as kind of uncurling or unfurling a bit at the end. The person who wrote them was like, boom, That's the end of that letter, and these 5 letters that uncurl a bit, or that, in the case of mem, square up a bit, are kaf, mem, nun, pei, and sade. So final form kaf, if you look on our thing here, you can see kaf here, and then you can see there's a final form kaf here. So if it's in the beginning or middle of a word, the kaf will look like this. If it's at the end of a word, it'll kind of uncurl a bit and let loose. It looks really kind of like a long dalet, actually, and it'll go low. Look how it goes beneath the square. So here's the square script, like where the letters usually occur. Remember, lamed goes way up above. Here, the kaf is going to go way down below, and it's going to go break the bottom of the barrier there. The mem, this is interesting, only at the end of a word, the mem gets square. Looks a little bit like a square samek or something. It's a strange thing, but it happens at the end of every word. So Elohim is a word that means God. You're going to come across that a whole lot in your time at seminary, so get used to hearing Elohim. That's Hebrew for God. It ends in a mem. So every time you see Elohim, it's going to end in this kind of mem, the square mem here, the final form mem. So next is nun, and you can see it's the same top, and it just kind of unfurls and curls out beneath the line. You can see that this is a little bit like a vav that just kind of keeps going and doesn't end. So you can think about it like I do, that this nun uncurls and straightens out its bottom and becomes a long final nun. The name Nathan comes from the Hebrew word Natan, and that ends in a nun. So every time you see Natan or Nathan, the prophet, it's going to end in this final form nun. Next is Pei. Pei also has this uncurled final form. It uncurls at the end there. So that's a final form Pei. And then lastly is the final form Tzadeh. Here's our tzadeh, which if you're going to draw it, you're going to just kind of make this line here and then a line up there. The final form is made a little bit differently. You make this line straight up and down here, and then you have this little line coming off of it. But notice it also, like the pei, goes beneath the line. It uncurls, whoop, and goes beneath the line. Those are important for final forms. So the word aretz, or eretz, which means land. It's the name of the daily newspaper and one of the daily newspapers in Israel. Haaretz, the land. Aretz is going to end in this. Aretz. So those are our final form letters, 5 of them. You can also note these in Kutz and Josberger, and there's a little bit more about them in the grammar. They are transliterated and pronounced exactly the same way as the non-final forms. So it's just a difference in their picture, not a difference in their sound. One other group of letters that I want to bring up, because we're going to come back to these. These are strange letters, the gutturals. They're made way back in your throat. Aleph is one of these. Remember that one? And then Hey, and then Chet, and then Ayin and Resh. Resh is not technically a guttural, but it acts like one, so we're going to stick it in there. It's kind of like Y as a vowel in English, sometimes Y. We're going to stick Resh in with the gutturals because it follows some of those rules. These gutturals are real strong. You can imagine, like you have to use so much of your throat to make one of these sounds that it actually ends up changing some of the sounds around them sometimes. People take some shortcuts with other vowel sounds around these because the gutturals are so hard to make. So we're going to come back to these. Just note that Aleph, Hey, Chet, Ayin, and Resh are unusual in how they're pronounced. There's the last thing. Kutz and Josberger have a little bit about letters that can look like one another, or how to tell them apart. My little thing, Zion, the Z sound looks a lot like Vav, the transliterated with an English W, but the V sound. Gimel, the G sound. Nun, those are all those thin letters, skinny letters. They all look pretty much alike, but just notice that Zion's got the beret on top. It's got this little hat that it wears, kind of cocked to the side, a little sassy hat. Vav is the nail. Gimel's got the little shoe. I think of it kind of like it's got a little boot here at the bottom. And then Nun has got the straight across the horizontal bottom tittle. So Zion, Vav, Gimel, Nun. Pay attention to those. Other ones you can easily confuse. Beit, Kaf. Notice that Beit has a flat bottom and a tittle coming out to the right, whereas Kaf has a rounded bottom right corner. And Dalet here, which has the 90-degree angle and the tittle hanging out to the top right. And Resh, which does not, it's rounded, does not have the tittle hanging out. So Beit and Kaf are easy to confuse. Dalet and Resh are easy to confuse. Samik and final form Mem, those could be confused. Samik's rounded, Mem is square. Square up your final form names because then you'll have less spelling errors and reading errors. Your Hey and your Chet. Remember, Hey has a bit left open in it for the air to get out. And Chet does not want to let that extra air out. So, Samik and Mem, final form Mem, and then Hey and Chet. Those are pairs of things that are easy to confuse. Sin and Sheen obviously are easy to get confused. This one on top here is Sheen, and notice it's got the dagesh on the top right. Not the dagesh, the dot on the top right, which is telling you that this is a Sheen, a sh sound, and then the Sin has a dot on the top left. Now, one student last year, maybe this is 2 years ago, came up with an acronym for this, or a mnemonic device, a way to remember this, which is that she is always right. So sh sound, the sheen, the dot is on the right. So she is always right. And the scene is left, I guess. So anyway, she is always right. Okay, so then Samik, you can sort of think about that as being another S sound. So sh, sa, and then sade is another S sound, but it's got that explosive bit. Here's the explosive diacritic at the bottom of the S that represents sade. And of course, this kind of spiky character here, but making another sort of S sound, sets. So sheen, seen, samik, sade. Hard to tell apart at first, but easy to tell apart once you've been doing this for just even about a week probably. So you probably noticed that we've learned all of the consonants so far. We have not learned any vowels. When Hebrew was originally written down, it did not have the vowels included. It just had consonants. Now, next lesson we'll actually address this. How is this possible? But just to say, these three letters here, tzade, remember in Hebrew you read from right to left. So the rightmost letter here is tzade. Then there's a dalet, and then there's a kof. So tzade, dalet, kof, that's tzadak, tzedek, tziduk, tzuduk. You can put any vowels you want in there. Now, how would ancient people do this? Well, they just kind of knew what it was. They already knew these things before they read them. They were oral performances first. The scriptures and liturgies and things like that. Writing was really a way to remember something that you already knew that you had written down. So people just would have figured it out, what it was by context. But all to say, if you kind of try all the different combinations, there's 10 different Hebrew words you can make, sticking different vowels in between those three letters. So eventually, when people had forgotten enough of what they had written first, or generations later, people had forgotten what their ancestors had written, they started to make vowel signs in order to fill in those things that had been left out at first. So in any event, we're going to get to the vowels next, but start by learning these consonants and just write them out again and again and try to recognize them. Open up your Hebrew Bible and just start to look through it and see if you can recognize any letters. Try to pick out the letters at the beginning of Genesis 1 and focus on the letters in some of the exercises in Kutz and Josberger. You can open it up to the middle of that book and you'll come across a lot of Hebrew, and just try to look at the letters and see if you can pick them out. And that will be a great way for you to grow in your Hebrew. So congratulations, you finished your first Hebrew lesson. I encourage all of you on this journey, and I know that this is a difficult one. Hebrew is not the easiest thing in the world. It seems like alien. You're writing in these letters that you haven't even imagined existed before. It is a rough start. However, we are going to get some pretty good stuff. Even within the first couple of weeks, we'll be reading some actual biblical texts. So stick with it and have courage and faith. And remember, God is with you always.